Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Malat here to talk with you about the critical appraisal paper that is quantitative in nature and as well as its graphic organizer. So, in the quantitative, numerical critical appraisal of a quantitative research article, we're going to be using this graphic organizer, and it would be helpful if you follow along with your graphic organizer. If you have that out, that would be really great. Okay, so this is set up exactly like the qualitative graphic organizer with the three columns and the article and reference you want to put up here in this space so that you know which article you're talking about. And again, the introduction and the problem purpose statement are the two areas in a research article that are not really don't usually have headers, but they're just when you first start reading the article after the abstract, this is what you're going to be seeing. So in the quantitative type of research study, we want you to first look at up here the independent and the dependent variables. The researcher should really make sure that they identify the dependent and independent variables, and they should also explain what they are. So you want to know whether the researcher identifies and clearly defines what's the independent, what's the dependent. They don't have to say this is the independent variable, this is the dependent variable, but you should be able to look at their research question and figure out which one is the independent and dependent. And remember that oftentimes a research article doesn't always have a research question. So again, you look at the research purpose to dissect that to find what the research question is. However, look at the next thing, were the specific aims or research question clearly identifiable? So just what I was saying, no, not usually. They're not usually present. So you may have a no here instead of a yes for the answer to that question. So you may want to dissect it here for yourself by looking at the research purpose. Again, just like the qualitative graphic organizer, we're very interested in you knowing what kind of design this is. It's not enough for the researcher to say we did a quantitative research design. No, we need the researcher to tell us exactly what kind of design it was. Was it experimental, non-experimental? Was it quasi-experimental, randomized control trial? If we have a lot of different things here for you to be thinking about for these studies. So the major bolded categories are the larger studies, and then the ones underneath them are the subcategories of what a non-experimental is, like a descriptive correlation, observation study. Those are all considered non-experimental. And then experimental is a pre-test, post-test, or a post-test only. Randomized clinical trial is also an experimental, but it is usually just called a randomized clinical trial. We also have you looking at things such as the same things that we had you look for in the qualitative, the author's qualification, the abstract, the report title. Again, the same kinds of things here for the purpose statement and the importance of the significance. And then under the literature review, did the authors look at what was known and what was not known by using a literature review? And does this literature review support the study's purposes? In the quantitative critical appraisal here, we want you to look to see what kind of studies were looked at. Were they recent, within the last 5 years, the last 10 years? And were those articles that were cited, were they topical articles or were they research in nature? And it'd be better if they were research in nature, okay? Do the author, the research studies that are cited in the literature, in the literature review, are they offering a balanced view of the topic? We also want to know if the authors relate a theoretical or conceptual framework in a quantitative study. This is more important in a quantitative study because a quantitative study really takes theory and tests the theory. So it's very important to have a conceptual framework or theoretical framework in a quantitative article, more so in quant than in qual. And so again, this is a yes/no question. Either the author has it there or they don't. But if they don't have a conceptual framework or a theoretical framework, then we really would be questioning the value and the credibility of the science and the work here. Okay, so most important too is if there is not a conceptual framework, then you do need to answer this question: which was not in the quant graphic organizer. It is in this one, and if a theoretical conceptual framework was not identified, why is its absence important? And this is in your book. The whole explanation of this is in your textbook. So please read that and find that in your textbook to help you understand that. Okay, so now we're in the section of the article that is starting to have some headers and some subtitles, so research methodology. And all this is all related to research methods. So what kind of design? We talked about that earlier, but what sample type? Are we talking about diabetic patients? Are we talking about left ventricular assist device? How many subjects or participants are in the sample? And as you know, for quantitative studies, the larger the number, the better the less likelihood of chance you have. So the larger the number, the better. And that's a little different in qualitative. The lower the number, the better. How were subjects recruited? How were they included? Based on what inclusion criteria or what excluded them from being participants in the study? The sampling method, the power analysis, which helps you decide on the sample. Moving forward, we want you to identify how did they collect their data? What methods did they use? Did they use a survey? Did they use blood pressure cuffs? Did they use lab values? So how did they collect data? And then what were the ethical considerations? How did they data analyze? How do they analyze their data? So the data analysis techniques are going to be with statistics in a numerical quantitative type study. We may use logistic regression. We may use odds ratios. We may use an intention to treat statistics, types of statistics. So correlation, descriptive, a survey, descriptive statistics like percentages and frequencies may be part of what the data analysis would look like in a quantitative study. We also have some other questions here about the level of significance. So you need to be able to find that. What was the level of significance that they used in the study to compare between groups if they're doing t-tests and that sort of thing. We talked about rigor in the qualitative study, and rigor in a quantitative study looks very different than it does in a qual. So there are two major words that are used in rigor to assess rigor in a quantitative study, and that is validity and reliability. Validity is basically the accuracy of the information that's being assessed. We want all the tools to be valid tools. Instruments such as surveys, questionnaires, that sort of thing, all need to be checked for content validity, construct or criterion validity. So if you are not seeing any discussion about validity or reliability here, then you have a problem in your measures, okay? The measures are not going to, if they're not valid and if they're not reliable or consistent, that's what reliability means, consistency, then you can't really be sure that the instruments really measured what the researchers intended them to measure if it's a problem with validity. And if you're looking for reliability, the tests of reliability are listed here, such as a reliability coefficient, Cronbach's alpha, test, retest reliability. You could also have terms such as inter-rater reliability. We do that as teachers when we compare how we grade people's assignments to make sure that we're grading them fairly for you. So that's just an example of inter-rater reliability. So basically, the authors need to describe the validity and the reliability of their instruments, whether that's going to be an SpO2 monitor or a blood pressure cuff or the reliability of a survey instrument. There are different ways to test that with different statistics. Okay, then we move on to the findings. There's a bunch of questions here. Specific aims are basically the aims and the measures of what the researcher intends to study, or it's like the research questions. And basically, we want to know if you think the sample size is large enough to generalize to broader populations. Do the authors talk about that? Generalizability is why we need a large sample size in a quantitative type study. We're also looking at the critique of implications and recommendations, and do the implications appear appropriate based on the results and the purpose of the study. So If the study doesn't really show strong relationships, but at the end of the study, the authors are saying, oh, yes, this is a strong correlation and we need to do da 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 da, then there's some sort of misinterpretation there because the implications are more than what the results really are saying. So you want to look out for, is the appropriate relationship between the results and what's being recommended for practice appropriate? Okay. And then in conclusion, this is very much like the qualitative graphic organizer content that we talked about. You're going to look above and around all of your comments that you had above this section to look for what you think are the strengths and weaknesses of the article, and you want to share those with us. So it's the same exact thing as you did for the qual, the student conclusion area, and you're looking at what's strong about this article, what's something that we'd have to really consider before applying this article to practice, to this knowledge to practice. You are going to not only just look and tell your opinions about what you think are the limitations, but also you want to consider what the author thinks are the limitations of their own research. And this should be discussed in the article. There's a problem if the author does not discuss limitations, because there's always limitations. Research is, we can't control every variable in a research study. So it's very important for authors and research studies to discuss what the limitations are and what people who are reading the research should really consider about the study and the study deficits, perhaps, when they are looking to use this information in practice with patients. And last but not least, it's the final part of this graphic organizer, and that's providing your opinion. So you're going to have a PICO question that goes with a research article that you're going to critique, and we want to make sure that you answer this question, which is provide a conclusion about the suitability of the study to support that PICO question. So basically, we want you to tell us, do you think that this article stands a good test to help give information for your PICO question so that you could use this information in taking care of a patient with the problem and the PICO question that you are looking at. We also have you looking at other things in this area. Are the results relevant to persons in similar situations? So people who have the same problem, would these results be helpful to them in practice? How could the results be applied in clinical practice? And should nurses use information from this article in research? So should we continue to do research on this topic? And how can we use this information in education? So that's the end of the quantitative graphic organizer. You can see there are differences between quantitative and qualitative studies. Mostly qualitative studies have smaller sample sizes and quantitative studies have larger. We're looking and concerned more about generalizability with a quantitative study because we can do that with a large sample size. On the other hand, qualitative studies have smaller sample sizes, and that is why they are considered exploratory and don't necessarily have the same kind of rigor as a quantitative study. It's rigor in a different way, which is called transferability versus generalizability in a quantitative study. So there are differences between the two types of studies, quantitative and a qualitative, and this is why we created two different graphic organizers for you to consider as you're developing your thoughts before you writing the paper itself. So the goal is for you to complete this graphic organizer before you start writing in groups and get that done and share the results with each other. We really appreciate your time, and please let us know if we can help you with anything. This is Dr. Malat, and let us know and ask the faculty. Bye-bye.